Hi, thank you for tuning in to Peaceful Passages. I'm Theresa Bates, the founder and teacher of the ministry that God has blessed me with. And today I have a special treat. Years ago, when I went to school and sought on how to do all the protocols of Hever Kadisha, what Tahara was all about, God directed my steps to the Gamliel Institute and my friend, David Zinner. So I remember the conversation really well at the beginning. And I just knew that it was a God connection for me. And what I wanted to learn on Tahara, he's my mentor. So I feel very privileged having David on my show with me. So this is my friend and mentor, David Zinner. So welcome, David. It's great to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things, what I want to do for this particular session is we want to talk about Tahara. We cover things for the deceased. We cover things for people, how to do, what to wear, what to do during a Tahara. So one of the things I do want to start with, since this is the first time that David is here, I'd like him to explain just briefly a little bit of his background and who he is and what he does.
Thanks, Theresa. Well, I have an interesting history. I was born Jewish. I practiced Judaism. I have been an executive director of a conservative synagogue for 10 years. I founded Kavod V'Nichum in the year 2000. Kavod V'Nichum means honor and comfort, and we provided education for Hever Kadisha groups around the U.S. and Canada, and did workshops and trainings. Excuse me. We also put on annual conferences for folks that moved around the country. We started an extensive website that had lots and lots of information about end-of-life questions and answers. And we started the Gamliel Training Institute in 2010 and taught 5 different courses, one of which was called Hever Kadisha, one of which was called Tahara and Shmira, Shiva. So, I've been immersed in this Hever Kadisha work for at least 20 years.
Wow. That's quite the history. And when you said a little bit of information, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of work that David has done, as well as the people that have come around him to help build the Institute. There's a wealth of information that he has blessed the community with. But one of the things that we want to cover today is basically in this 2-part series is a lot of the what is Tahara, how to do a Tahara, and what all of that entails. Because there's little things there's a lot that's the same between men and women, but there's also little differences between men and women. So, David, would you mind covering a little bit about, a basic Tahara?
Sure. So I guess I should start out by trying to say what a Tahara is, right? The word Tahara, Hebrew word, often translated as relating to purity, but the ritual of Tahara is so much more than that. And it often gets confused by people who think that basically it's a practice of pouring water and doing a purification ritual. But in reality, Tahara is much deeper than that. I like to think of it as having 4 different components. The first component is having representatives of the community come together. And this is really important because Taharas can't be done by an individual. They're typically not done by a funeral director. In Jewish practice, they're typically done by people from the community who've done some amount of training, who've done some amount of learning, but they represent the larger community. They are community representatives. The second element of a tahara that's important is to understand the intention that comes along with it. The Hebrew word would be the kavanah. The intention is one of seriousness, is one of loving care. It's important for people to take this in a way that is different than what they do in their normal daily lives. We're the ones who are going to be seeing this person who's dead and who's before us for the last time, taking care of them. And we have a responsibility to them, to their family, to the whole community, to do it with a lot of respect and a lot of love. The third element of a tahara is prayers. Can't do a tahara without praying, without doing the appropriate prayers, which may vary from group to group, but the intention there is that we're not just doing the rituals. We are acknowledging that there's a higher power, that we are asking the person before us to forgive us if we do anything that dishonors them in any way, but we're also interceding with them before God to ask for God to treat them with mercy and justice. And then the fourth element for tahara is the physical washing and dressing and casketing. And in some cases, this can't be done, depending on what the person died from, or if their body isn't present, or if we're prohibited from going to the funeral home to do the washing, such as happened during COVID. So really all four elements make up a tahara, and it's important for folks to understand that a tahara needs all of those four.
Yeah. And I like how you broke them down, because each of the different elements, there's a part where they can almost stand alone on importance and necessity. And we could run with each one of those particular topics. But it's interesting is when you had mentioned the kavanah aspect, the purity, because that's one of the things that makes what we do stand apart, different than a funeral home. Because all the elements that you mentioned is grouped together to show honor, respect, loving care. We're coming together as a community. We're coming together, individuals wanting to say thank you, God, for this vessel that we get to care for. Thank you for creating this person to be in the world that we can learn from, and putting our time aside to help somebody in need where they can't do anything. But one of the other things I think is really nice, learning to do a lot of the tahara things, is the level of working or seeing past what we do for the deceased and seeing how the family responds to what we do and how we do it and why. Because my experience being in the non-Jewish community, taking the blessings that you have given me from what you have learned, allowing me to learn from you to take it to them, is they have no idea what is involved, and they don't know what we do until they see what we do. And then when they see what we do, they're like, oh my gosh, how do you know? So it's all of those little elements that, with what you had described, with what we walk through with taking care of a deceased. So when we're doing the tahara, we're definitely taking care of the deceased, but we're also bringing the mourners, the loved ones, that comfort to knowing that they're in loving care, and know that we're trying the best that we can to take care of their loved one.
Yeah, in the Jewish community, there is a lot of a lack of knowledge about what a tahara is, in much of the community, and that what you're describing is very different when we do a home tahara, where the family is present and the family is watching what we do, maybe, or participating in what we do, versus a funeral home tahara, where many of the tahara teams in the Jewish community are very reluctant to have family members participate.
Right.
Now sometimes, we'll encourage them, the tahara teams, to allow a family member to come in at the end and to tie the last knot and help place the body in the casket. But the comfort that families receive is sort of indirect, in a typical funeral home tahara. It's sort of like, they know that somebody did something, but they're not exactly sure what they did or who did it. And I think that that's one of the problems that we have, because it means that the knowledge is not passed on. The feelings are not passed on adequately. So there are groups that, Chaver Kadisha groups in the Jewish community that do it differently. But for the most part, families typically generally don't know what's going on inside the tahara room.
Right. Well, your explanation is, as usual for me, right on the money. My describing the family was because in Jewish protocol and with what I teach, the family generally is not present in the tahara room, whether in the home or in the funeral home. They're not there. If they are in the participating in the tahara, it's usually the time when their feet is being washed, and that's about the only time. They're not generally present, because one of the things that we've learned is in the rituals that we practice is the family doesn't do any part of the tahara. The men take care of the men. The women take care of the women. The men never take care of the women, but the women can take care of the men if there's no men available to do the tahara. So my comment for the family is more of on the peripheral, because they don't always know what happens in the tahara room. They just know that they wanted something special, honorable to their religious belief, as well as thanking God for them. And we just that's one of the elements we bring in without a lot of detail. Because what happens, that I've learned, is what happens in the tahara room stays in the tahara room. Because you can't share it. You can't share it with your spouse. You can't share it with your neighbor. Definitely don't share it with anybody else in the community. And that's one of the challenges that you were saying, is, in the Jewish communities, why it sometimes is challenge with getting help or knowing what happens inside the tahara room. And it's a little different with what I'm doing, is I'm following the same protocol, but I'm just being a little bit more vocal in some aspects, telling people what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. And we don't share what happens inside the tahara room with the family at all, because sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's not. But they don't need to know that. That's part of the blessing of taking what happens in the tahara room and sometimes just taking it in prayer, and at times crying over it, but not sharing it with the family, because there's things that happen in the tahara room that shouldn't be shared with the family.
Yeah, I mean, we should be careful when we say things about what happens in the tahara room. What we're usually talking about is not
specific.
No, it's not usually some kind of disaster or something like.
Right.
People might imagine the body falling on the floor or something like that. I've never seen that.
Yeah, I haven't either, thankfully.
Yeah. What more likely, we're talking about, does the person have bed sores? Did they have bleeding that wouldn't stop? Did they have other fluids coming out that were difficult to control? That kind of thing.
Or even a hidden tattoo that they didn't know was there. I mean,
so the goal is not to embarrass the family.
Right.
But your other point about providing information and education to the family and to the community about Tahara and what it is and how beautiful and respectful and loving it is, that's really important and something that we've been trying to do in the Jewish community and to educate people about what this is, because people who don't know about Tahara aren't going to say, yes, that's what I want, unless they understand a little bit about it.
Right. And it's been a lot of my experience is because since I'm one of the blessed pioneers in the non-Jewish community, Christian, Messianic, Hebrew roots community, where people are learning what I do. So I'm going into a new community where sometimes I don't know anybody. And so I'm meeting everybody for the first time. And when you it's amazing how people are timid, but they step up to the plate saying, okay, I'll do this. And you see the anxiety on their face, but when because generally what I do is I will go in and see the deceased first, because being the lead, I want to know what the deceased looks like, what challenges are we going to be facing, and sometimes it can be very easy in respect where there's no issues. Other times it's very difficult and there's a lot of issues. And I like going in there first to understand, to see where I'm at. Sometimes I have the funeral home taking care of the deceased so we can do the Tahara. That's an individual thing. But after I go in and view the deceased, then I go and talk to the team. And because I viewed them, the deceased, and I can tell them a little bit more of what I see to calm their fears and for them to realize and to share with them on what they're doing, why they're doing it. And most every time afterwards, people are like, that was so beautiful. Even with some of the Taharas that were really very, very challenging, that I wish I had a more experienced team. You're doing what you're doing, then you're being a servant. There's the Hebrew word that a lot of the people in our circles know is hineni. Here I am, use me. So being willing to be used in that capacity, and stepping in saying, okay, let me know what needs done. When they're done, they walk away with, oh my gosh, it's not as scary as I thought, and I can do this again. So has that been generally your experience in the Jewish community as well?
Yeah, even a team that's totally untrained, if you have an experienced leader who has good skills, it's possible for them to keep people calm, keep them focused, delegate the work among the groups so that everybody has something to do. Ask people where they're at, how they're feeling. If people are not feeling like in the middle of the Tahara, if they're not feeling like they can do that, you can give them permission to walk out and get a breath of fresh air. Because what we say is, if you're not feeling comfortable with what you're doing, you're feeling nervous or whatever, for some reason you feel you can't do it, and you can walk out by yourself, that's good. If you faint, there's two people who have to carry you.
Right. That definitely is not good. And that's one of the things I encourage is, like you were saying, if they're having a hard time and they need to step away, then by all means step away. If they can't finish doing what they're doing and they have to leave, then I encourage, you can leave the room, that's fine, but don't leave the building, because you're a part of the team. And we want, we want to be able to help and be a blessing and assisting to the team as well, because we are all in this together. And we want to make sure that they're physically and emotionally okay, because, sometimes being in a Tahara is hard and challenging. And there's times being the lead is challenging. there was one Tahara that I didn't know the female. And here I'm the lead, training a brand new team at the same time. And so like I said, I walk in the room, I see the deceased, and I just take a deep breath. And when you're the lead, you really can't not follow through. So looking at the rest of the stuff that I needed and still taking a deep breath and another deep breath and another deep breath. And then I go and talk to the team, let them know about, what they're going to experience in the Tahara room. But the reason why I had to take a deep breath is when I walked in, because I lost my mom when I was 21, and the deceased looked exactly like my mom. And it's like, okay, take a deep breath, and letting the team know what I'm experiencing instead of trying to keep it inside. And because being the lead, they needed to know what my struggle was. Because if they see me crying, it's, I can see the team, go, why is she crying? What's wrong? What did I, all of that stuff that we as people can get drawn up. So what I did is I told the team that I'm giving you guys a heads up. The deceased looked like my mom. So if I get teary-eyed, then I'm letting you know ahead of time, that is why. We will complete doing what we're doing. I'm not going to leave, yada, yada, yada. And that actually brought peace and comfort to them because I was vulnerable enough to them to let them know what my struggle was, but also to let them know that it's okay to walk through it in the midst of a struggle,
Right. And the flip side of that is that at the same time, while the team leader is allowed to have their emotions, the team leader also has to be able to delegate, right? And you have to be able to do both at the same time. Right. So, it doesn't make sense for the team leader to rush in and do everything themselves. It makes more sense for the team leader to make sure everyone has a job and everyone knows what's going on. Right. So in some sense, the team leader has to be able to hold both truths at the same time.
Yeah, and that sometimes is not easy because there's been Taharas that, like I said, are fairly simple. There's no issues, but sometimes taking care of somebody that has an autopsy, sometimes they're sewn, sometimes they're not. You have, like I said, you're seeing a loved one. I looked at her in that instance and took better care because I didn't know about Tahara or this aspect when my mother passed away. That was 38 years ago. Woohoo! Anyway,
one of my mentors, who you might remember, Rabbi Mel Glazer, said that when you go into the Tahara room to do a Tahara, you not only see the person who's dead and laying on the table before you, but you also see your parents, which you obviously were having.
Did that one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you see yourself, you know that will be you someday laying on the table, and you hope that you've trained your teams well enough that they know how to take care of you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the whole thing when I started learning about all the Hever Kadisha aspects, like, wow, okay, so if I have the ability to, I'm not a control freak, but in essence, when I pass away, not if, but when, because there's 100% mortality rate. So we're all going to pass away at one time or another. Having the ability to have other women that hold the same stance, the same religious belief, the same kavanah, the same purity that I try to walk in to take care of me is important to me. Whether you do a Tahara or not, if you want to have it done, then understanding a little bit what goes on behind the scene, because not everybody can do what we do, which makes it interesting, but having the understanding of what we do and, seeing our loved ones and seeing ourselves, because, it's seeing a deceased, it's not as scary as what society wants you to think, but it does make you think about your own mortality, because it's definitely a reality check. Yeah, and watching other people, work through their different issues, and it's interesting because with a lot of the times you want to try to have these discussions outside of the room, but when with this particular Tahara, with it being my mom, I learned I ended up taking a little bit extra special care, and my prayers for her and for her family were a little bit more intimate than normal. And because you pray for the family a little bit more, you pray for, the blessing. And, I walked away from that, and calling my dad, who was still alive. Mm-hmm. Hey, Dad, was thinking about you. Are you okay? Yeah, my dad wouldn't understand what I'm doing. But
so what you're pointing out is really, really critical. That in addition to caring for the person who died and bringing some comfort to the family, one of the end results of doing a Tahara is that we become more sensitive to life. Right? And we become more sensitive to those living who are around us. We become more appreciative of them, because you can't get any closer to death than when you go to do a Tahara, when you lift and turn and wash and dress the body of the person.
Right.
You're as close to death as you can possibly get.
Right.
And then when you come out of that space, you really appreciate every living thing and every living person.
That is true. So thank you all again for tuning in to Peaceful Passages. Thank you, David, for your time and input, and have a great day. Shalom.
We have exciting news! GLC is delighted to share that our 501c3 tax exemption status has been officially reinstated. Your donations are now tax deductible, including those made after 2015. Consider contributing a tax-deductible gift today at www.glctv.tv. Every amount counts.